Story 1. The Sleepover That Turned Into a Nightmare. Lena and her best friend Chloe had been planning their sleepover for weeks. The excitement was palpable as they made plans for late-night movies, snacks, and whispered secrets about school gossip. They had been inseparable since childhood, and sleepovers at Chloe's house were always something to look forward to. But that particular night, October 14th, was different. It should have been like all the other sleepovers they'd had, but something felt off. Chloe's parents had gone out of town for the weekend, and her older brother Mark was supposed to be looking after them. He wasn't exactly thrilled about the responsibility, but he agreed to keep an eye on them. As night settled in, the house felt eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. The walls creaked, the wind howled outside, and every little noise seemed amplified in the dark. It was around midnight when things began to shift. The two girls had just finished a scary movie marathon and decided to turn in for the night. They snuggled up in sleeping bags on the living room floor, chatting and laughing softly in the dim glow of a nightlight. But as Lena lay there, drifting off to sleep, she heard something that sent a chill down her spine. A soft scraping sound coming from somewhere upstairs. It was faint, but it was there. At first, she thought it was just the house settling or perhaps a branch scraping against the window, but the sound persisted. Scrape, scrape, scrape. "Did you hear that?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling, as she nudged Chloe. Chloe, who had been half asleep, frowned. "What? I don't hear anything." But Lena was sure of it. She could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The scraping continued, and the more she listened, the more convinced she became that it wasn't just the house. Something, or someone, was up there. As the night wore on, the scraping sound grew louder. It was no longer just a faint noise. It sounded like something or someone was dragging something heavy across the floor. A cold dread began to settle over Lena's chest, making it hard to breathe. "Maybe we should check it out," Lena whispered, her voice shaking. Chloe looked at her, eyes wide with confusion. "Are you crazy? It's just the wind or something." Lena wasn't so sure. Her gut told her that this wasn't just some natural sound. The longer she lay there, the more anxious she became. Her heart raced and her breathing quickened. She could feel her pulse in her ears, a constant pounding reminder that something was wrong. After what felt like an eternity, Lena couldn't take it any longer. "I'm going to check," she whispered, standing up slowly, careful not to wake Chloe. She tiptoed toward the staircase, her eyes scanning the dark hallway for any sign of movement. At the foot of the stairs, she paused. The scraping noise had stopped, but the air felt thick and still, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Lena swallowed hard. She knew it was stupid to go upstairs alone, but the curiosity gnawed at her. As she crept up the stairs, her footfalls barely making a sound, she couldn't help but feel like someone was watching her. She glanced over her shoulder, but the hallway below was empty. Still, the feeling of being watched only intensified as she reached the top of the stairs. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside the window. But there, in the darkness, she saw something that made her blood run cold. At the far end of the hallway, the door to Chloe's parents' bedroom was slightly ajar, and just inside, standing in the shadows, was a figure. Lena froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The figure in the doorway was tall, thin, and unmoving. At first, Lena thought it might be Mark, Chloe's older brother, but as she squinted, she realized that it wasn't him. It was a man, someone she didn't recognize. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, in the darkness, watching her. Panic surged through Lena's veins. She should have turned and run, should have screamed for Chloe. But instead, she stood frozen, her legs like lead. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. What was this person doing? In the house? Why wasn't Mark taking care of them? And why was this man just standing there in the dark? Suddenly, the figure took a step forward, its movement jerky and unnatural. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, but her voice was trapped in her chest. Her mind screamed for her to run, but her body refused to obey. Without thinking, Lena turned and bolted down the stairs, her feet pounding against the wood floor. She could hear the sound of the figure's footsteps behind her, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she saw Chloe, now wide awake and sitting up in her sleeping bag. "Lena, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice thick with sleep. Lena didn't answer. She grabbed Chloe's hand and yanked her up, pulling her toward the front door. "We need to get out of here now." But before they could reach the door, the man appeared in the living room, blocking their escape. He was closer now, his face just barely visible in the dim light. He smiled, and it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a sickening grin, full of malice. Chloe screamed, but Lena covered her mouth, pulling her friend toward the kitchen. The man's grin only widened as he took a slow step toward them. It was as if he was enjoying the terror in their eyes, savoring their fear. Lena's mind raced as she tried to think of a way out. The kitchen window was just a few feet away, but the man was between them and freedom. There was no way to reach it without him noticing. The back door was locked, and the front door was blocked. They were trapped. "Who are you?" Lena finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling with fear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. Chloe started to sob quietly, clutching Lena's arm. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. But Lena couldn't think of a way out. Every escape route was blocked, and the man was too close. She could feel his eyes on her, cold and calculating. It was as if he knew exactly what they were thinking, exactly what they were going to do. As the man took another step forward, Lena made a split-second decision. She pushed Chloe toward the kitchen window. "Go!" she screamed. "I'll hold him." "Off." Chloe hesitated, her face filled with fear, but Lena didn't give her a choice. She shoved her toward the window, hoping that her friend would be able to escape. But just as Lena turned to face the man, he lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her back. The man's grip was cold and ironclad as he dragged Lena back toward the living room. She fought with every ounce of strength she had, but it was useless. He was too strong. Just as he pulled her away from the window, Chloe screamed again. Lena turned just in time to see her friend climbing out of the window, scrambling for freedom. But it was too late. The man turned to face Lena, his smile widening as he watched Chloe disappear into the night. He wasn't chasing her. No. He was content. He had what he wanted. And that was Lena. What would you do if you were trapped in a house with a stranger, unable to escape? Would you fight to protect your friend? Or would you panic and freeze just like Lena? Do you think you could survive a night like that, knowing that the terror was just beginning? Let us know what you would do in the comments. Story 2. The babysitter who wasn't alone. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a typical Friday night for Anna, who had been babysitting for the Johnson family for the past 6 months. The kids were already asleep, the house was peaceful, and she was looking forward to a night of watching movies and scrolling through her phone. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson had gone out for dinner, and they trusted Anna to watch over their 2 young children. Anna had babysat at their house before and knew the layout well. She liked how cozy it felt, how safe. The house, tucked away on the outskirts of town, was a classic 2-story with old wooden floors that creaked with every step. The street outside was quiet, and the neighborhood was mostly families. There was nothing that could make her feel uneasy, or so she thought. It wasn't until she started hearing the noises that her sense of security began to unravel. At first it was subtle, the sound of something moving in the kitchen, a creak from the hallway. But when Anna glanced at the clock, she saw it was already well past midnight, and the house was still. The kids were in bed, and everything should have been calm. But the noises kept coming. It was as if someone else was in the house, someone who shouldn't have been there. The first noise was the soft thud of something hitting the floor, followed by a scuffling sound that seemed to come from upstairs. Anna froze, staring at the staircase. The house was old and creaky sounds were common, but this was different. It wasn't the usual creak of the house settling. No, this was something, or someone moving around. She texted Mrs. Johnson just to be sure. "Everything okay at your end?" Anna typed, trying to keep her anxiety in check. The response came quickly. "Yeah, we're fine. Just finished dinner. Be back in an hour." Anna let out a shaky breath and tried to dismiss the unease that was creeping into her chest. Maybe she was just imagining things. After all, she was alone in a big house at night. It was normal to feel a little jumpy, but the sound of a door opening upstairs made her heart skip a beat. It wasn't one of the kids. It was too loud, too deliberate. Someone was definitely in the house. Anna stood up slowly, her pulse racing as she tried to assess the situation. The living room, illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp, seemed too quiet, too still. But the more she listened, the more she realized there was something off about the silence. The house was breathing, it seemed. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every creak felt like a warning. Her first instinct was to call the police, but something stopped her. What if it was just her imagination? What if it was a random noise, something completely explainable? She didn't want to look foolish, especially for something so trivial. The last thing she wanted was to make an emergency call over something that could easily be explained away. But then, the door upstairs creaked open again. This time, it was followed by heavy footsteps. Slow and deliberate, they echoed down the staircase, sending a jolt of fear through Anna's chest. Whoever it was, they weren't trying to be discreet. They wanted her to hear them. She felt her throat tighten as she slowly backed away from the stairs. The house had 2 levels, and the second-floor hallway connected the bedrooms, including the kids' rooms. She had been upstairs just a few hours ago to tuck the children in. It had been completely empty, except for the kids, of course. The footsteps drew closer. Anna quickly scanned the room for anything she could use as a weapon. Her mind raced. She had to act fast. With trembling hands, she grabbed the first thing she could find, a heavy lamp. She held it in front of her like a shield as she backed toward the kitchen. The footsteps stopped suddenly, as if the person had heard her move. There was a deafening silence. It was then that Anna heard something else, a faint breathing sound from the hallway, soft but unmistakable. Someone was standing just on the other side of the wall. She held her breath, praying that whoever it was couldn't hear her heart pounding. She took a step back, careful not to make a sound. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it one of the kids playing a prank? Was it someone who had broken in? Or worse, was it someone else who had been in the house all along? A soft voice, barely a whisper, broke the silence. "Anna?" It was a child's voice, but it wasn't one of the Johnsons' kids. It was a deep, hoarse whisper that sounded wrong. Anna froze, staring at the hallway as if it were a living thing. The voice called out again, this time louder. "Anna, I know. You're there." Without thinking, Anna rushed into the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Her pulse raced as she fumbled for her phone. She quickly dialed 911, her fingers shaking as she pressed the numbers. The line rang, but when the operator finally answered, Anna could barely get her words out. "911, what's your emergency?" "There's someone in the house," Anna gasped. "I'm babysitting, and I heard someone upstairs. I think they're trying to get to me." The operator's voice was calm and soothing, but Anna could hear the urgency behind it. "Stay calm. We've dispatched officers to your location. Do you have a safe place to go? Lock yourself in a room until they arrive." But before Anna could respond, she heard the voice again, closer this time. It was still faint, but she could tell it was no longer coming from upstairs. The person was in the house, downstairs. Anna. Her heart dropped as the door handle to the kitchen rattled. Whoever was out there was trying to get in. Panic flooded her senses. She had made a huge mistake. In her fear, she had locked herself in the kitchen, isolated from the front door. She should have run out, but instead she had stayed. Now she was trapped. "Please help me," Anna cried into the phone. "They're inside and I don't know what they want." Suddenly the rattling stopped and the house fell into an eerie silence again. Anna's heart raced in her chest as she stared at the door, trying to hear any sound, anything that would tell her where the intruder was. Seconds felt like hours. Then, the phone went dead. Anna's stomach dropped as she stared at the screen. The call had ended without warning. She had no time to react. The kitchen light flickered, and she heard a soft scrape on the door. A soft laugh. Then, a sudden crash. The door splintered and opened, revealing a tall figure in the doorway. They wore a mask, but Anna could see the outline of their face beneath, its eyes wide, wild, and filled with something sinister. Anna stepped back, instinctively grabbing the knife from the counter. But the figure only chuckled, a low, chilling sound that made her blood freeze. "No need for that," the voice said, raspy and cold. "You won't need it where you're going." Before Anna could react, the figure lunged at her. The knife slipped from her grasp, and she was thrown to the ground with a sickening thud. She kicked and screamed, but the figure was too strong, and just as quickly as the struggle began, the door to the house burst open. Police officers flooded into the kitchen, and the figure was tackled to the floor. But it was too late for Anna. The intruder had been watching her for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, everything she had believed was safe was shattered. She would never look at a quiet house the same way again. What would you do if you were stuck in a house with a stranger, and you realized that there was no escape? Would you be able to stay calm, or would panic take over? Could you make it out alive, or would the intruder get the best of you? Share your thoughts in the comments. Could this have happened to you? Story 3. The Midnight Visitor. Megan had never been one to turn down a sleepover invitation. As the youngest of 4 siblings, she was used to the noise, the chaos, and the endless family gatherings. When her best friend Emma invited her over for a quiet Friday night sleepover, Megan couldn't resist. Emma's house was large, tucked away on the edge of town in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where the houses were spaced far apart and the streets were always empty by 10 p.m. It was the perfect setting for a chill night, just the two of them, watching movies and chatting about their school days. By the time the sun set, they were comfortably nestled on the couch in Emma's living room, the light from the TV flickering as they scrolled through Netflix. Emma's parents had gone out for the evening, leaving the house entirely to them. It was a rare opportunity for the two girls to be alone, without any distractions. The night was peaceful, at least for the first few hours. As midnight approached, Megan felt the weight of sleep begin to creep up on her. Emma seemed to be feeling the same way, her eyes slowly drooping as the TV show they were watching dragged on. Megan yawned and stretched, debating whether she should go to bed or stay up a little longer. But just as she was about to head upstairs, something caught her attention. A faint sound, almost like a whisper, came from the kitchen. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, as old houses often do. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't a whisper at all. It was a voice. "Help me." Megan froze, her heart skipping a beat. She looked over at Emma, who was now fully asleep, oblivious to the strange noise. The voice, soft and desperate, came again. "Help me. Please." This time it was closer, and Megan knew for certain that it wasn't Emma. Megan's mind raced as she tried to figure out what she had heard. The voice sounded like it was coming from the kitchen. She stood still, listening intently, but the house was silent again. Maybe she had imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind, or the house creaking in the night. But something deep in her gut told her that wasn't the case. She crept toward the kitchen, each step slow and careful. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft shuffle of her feet on the hardwood floor. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and the faint light from the street lamps outside filtered through the window, casting long shadows on the floor. Megan hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. What if it was nothing? What if she was just being paranoid? But the voice from earlier echoed in her mind. "Help me." Taking a deep breath, Megan pushed the door open. The kitchen was empty. The lights were off, and the only thing that caught her attention was the old wooden rocking chair in the corner, gently rocking back and forth as if someone had just stood up from it. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly stepped inside, scanning the room. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that seemed to explain the voice she had heard. But then she noticed something strange. A shadow, just outside the kitchen window, moved. At first, Megan thought it was a trick of the light, but the shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if it was growing closer. Panic surged in her chest. She quickly ran back into the living room, where Emma was still fast asleep. Megan grabbed her phone and texted her friend, her fingers shaking as she typed, "Emma, wake up! There's someone outside. I swear I saw someone move by the window." The seconds dragged on as she waited for Emma's reply. The fear that had been building in her chest seemed to explode, making it hard for her to breathe. What if someone had been watching the house? What if the voice she had heard was a warning? Emma's reply came quickly. "I'm sure it's nothing. Go back to sleep. You're freaking out for no reason." Megan wanted to argue, but a loud thud from the kitchen made her jump. Someone was in the house. Her heart raced as she quickly ran toward the kitchen again, her phone still in hand. The noise had come from inside the house, no doubt about it. But when she reached the door, she hesitated. What if it wasn't a person at all? What if it was just an animal or something else? The thought made her hesitate, but only for a moment. She couldn't ignore it. Not after hearing that voice. Not after the shadow outside. Megan stepped into the kitchen once again, holding her phone up as a light source. Her eyes scanned the dark room, and for a brief moment, everything seemed still. Everything seemed safe. But just as she turned toward the back door, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The door was wide open. It had been closed earlier, and now it was standing wide open, letting in the cool night air. Megan's breath caught in her throat. She backed away slowly, her mind spinning as she tried to make sense of it. Had she forgotten to close it earlier? She didn't think so. She was sure she had. As she took another step back, she caught movement in the reflection of the window above the sink. A shadow? No. A figure was standing just outside the door, staring directly at her. Megan's body froze, her breath caught in her throat. The figure stood completely still, and though it was dark outside, Megan could make out the shape of a person, their eyes glowing in the darkness. The voice returned, softer now but still clear. "Help me, please." Megan felt a chill race down her spine. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. Her hands trembled as she backed away from the door, retreating into the living room. She slammed the kitchen door behind her, locking it, though she knew it wouldn't keep the figure out. Her heart hammered in her chest as she rushed to Emma's side, shaking her violently. "Emma, wake up!" she cried, her voice breaking. Emma groggily opened her eyes, still half asleep. "Megan, what's wrong? You're freaking out." "Someone's in the house. Someone's outside," Megan shouted, almost frantic. "We have to leave now." Emma rubbed her eyes and sat up, clearly confused. "What are you talking about? You're scaring me." But Megan wasn't waiting any longer. She grabbed Emma's arm and pulled her up from the couch, but as they moved toward the front door, Megan stopped in her tracks. The figure was inside now. It was standing in the hallway, just outside the living room. A tall, lanky figure, completely still. It had a face, but it was twisted and warped, like something that shouldn't have been human. Its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, and its mouth was slightly open, as if it were about to speak. The voice came again, but this time, it was much closer. "Help me," Megan screamed as the figure lunged at them, but before it could reach her, the front door burst open. The police flooded the house, and within moments, the figure was tackled to the ground. But when they pulled it off, Megan saw that it wasn't human at all. It was a man, disguised in a strange mask, his face painted in disturbing patterns. Megan collapsed to the floor, her legs no longer able to hold her up. The figure had been watching her and Emma all along. It had been in the house, hidden in the dark corners, just waiting for the right moment to strike. The police quickly arrested the intruder, but Megan would never feel safe again. It was a nightmarish realization that she had been so close to something truly terrible. That voice, the whispers in the dark, had been a warning, but she hadn't understood it in time. As the officers escorted the man away, Megan and Emma stood there in shock, their minds trying to process what had just happened. They were safe, yes, but the memory of that night would haunt them forever. Have you ever been in a situation where you heard a voice or saw a figure that wasn't supposed to be there? How did you react? Share your experiences with us in the comments. Could you have escaped in time? Story 4. The Face Behind the Window. Lily was excited about the sleepover at her cousin Sarah's house. It had been a while since they had a chance to hang out without their parents, and they both had been looking forward to a night of horror movies, junk food, and maybe even some ghost stories. Sarah's house was large, an old farmhouse with creaky floors and old-fashioned charm. It had been in the family for generations, and while it was beautiful, there was something unsettling about the way the wind would whistle through the cracks of the old wooden house at night. The two girls spent most of the evening talking about their school days, catching up on the latest gossip. But as the clock ticked past midnight, the atmosphere shifted. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of time, the wind howling outside. It felt like the house was alive in the dark. They had just finished watching a movie when Sarah suggested they play a game. They both agreed, laughing and fooling around, but as they settled into the living room, Sarah's older brother Jake popped his head in, looking grumpy as ever. "You girls aren't planning on staying up all night, are you?" Jake smirked. "You know what happens when you do?" Lily raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Jake just grinned and walked out of the room, leaving them both with an unsettling feeling. The warning wasn't exactly comforting, but they shrugged it off, choosing instead to make their way to the back porch, where the view of the sprawling fields behind the house stretched endlessly into the night. It was so quiet, the kind of stillness that made the tiniest sound seem amplified. That was when Lily noticed the window. The back porch window, which had always been dark, seemed different. It was barely noticeable at first, but when she stared a little longer, something was off. The window was ajar, just a crack, enough for something or someone to slip through. But there was no breeze, no draft. "Did you leave the window open?" Lily asked Sarah, her voice a little shaky. Sarah turned to look at the window, her brow furrowing. "No, it's always closed at night. The wind doesn't come in this way. The last time I checked, it was locked." Lily felt a chill run down her spine. That was strange. Sarah had always been meticulous about keeping the house secure, especially in the middle of nowhere like this. The window had been securely shut when they first came outside, but now it was open just enough to be suspicious. Sarah went over and pulled it shut, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As Sarah slid the window closed, she turned back to Lily, offering a nervous smile. "Probably just the wind. It gets pretty strong around here at night. We should probably go back inside. It's getting late." They both turned to head back to the house, but just as they reached the door, Lily glanced back at the window. She froze. There, pressed up against the glass, was a face. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, but as Lily stared, her heart skipped a beat. The face was pale, its features twisted into an expression of pure malice. The eyes were wide, unblinking, and the mouth was drawn into a grotesque smile that seemed to stretch beyond what was natural. Lily gasped and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Sarah!" she screamed, pointing at the window. Sarah whirled around, her face going pale when she saw what Lily was talking about. The window was clear again, as if nothing had been there. But Lily was certain. She had seen it. The face had been there just inches away from her. They both turned back to the house, hurrying inside as quickly as they could, slamming the door shut behind them. Lily was breathing hard, her pulse pounding in her ears. But when she looked at Sarah, her cousin looked just as frightened. "Lily, what did you see?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know. I saw a face pressed against the window. It was so wrong. I don't know how to explain it." Sarah's face grew even more tense. "You're not the only one. I've seen it too." Lily's blood ran cold. "What do you mean you've seen it?" Sarah took a deep breath, clearly struggling to calm down. "A few months ago, I saw something similar. only I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. I thought it was just my imagination. But tonight, it's different. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. Lily was afraid. Not just afraid of what she had seen, but afraid of what was happening to Sarah. The eerie feeling that had started to settle over them both was unbearable. The house felt cold, even though the heat was on. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, and every creak of the old floorboards made them jump. "What do we do?" Lily whispered. Sarah, her eyes wide with fear, glanced nervously around the room. "We lock the doors, and we wait for the sun to come up. We don't open the door for anyone." But Lily wasn't sure that was enough. She had already seen the face, and Sarah had confirmed it was not the first time it had happened. Whatever this thing was, it was getting closer. As the night dragged on, the unease in the house grew. Every time the wind howled outside, the windows seemed to rattle. Every floorboard that creaked beneath their feet sent shivers down their spines. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. They decided to stay in the living room, barricading the door with whatever furniture they could find. But just as they settled into a tense silence, they heard it, a light tap at the window. Sarah and Lily froze. The tapping came again, more insistent this time. It wasn't the wind. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. It sounded like someone, or something, was knocking. Lily's eyes widened in horror. "No, no, no, no! I won't open it!" But before Sarah could protest, Lily stood up and slowly approached the window, her heart pounding in her chest. The closer she got, the more the tapping seemed to grow louder, almost as if it were right next to her. She pulled the curtain back slightly, holding her breath. And there it was again. The face. This time it wasn't pressed against the window, but standing just outside in the dark. The face was staring directly at her. Its eyes were wide, its mouth twisted into that same malicious grin. Lily screamed and stumbled back, knocking over a chair in the process. Sarah rushed to her side, her face pale with fear. "What is it? What's out there?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. Lily could barely speak, but she managed to choke out one word. "It's him. It's the one from before." The terror in the room intensified. They had locked all the doors, but now, the windows were being rattled violently, as if someone or something was trying to get inside. The knocking turned into pounding, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the yard, drawing closer and closer. Lily could hardly breathe. They couldn't stay in the living room. The thing outside, whatever it was, knew they were there. It was taunting them. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, and one of the windows shattered. The glass fell to the floor, in a shower of sharp pieces, and before they could react, the figure from outside was inside. It was tall, unnaturally thin, with a pale face and dark, hollow eyes. Its skin looked stretched, and its mouth opened wider than what should have been possible, emitting a high-pitched, grating laugh. Lily and Sarah screamed, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there staring at them, its eyes never leaving theirs. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with fear. They ran. It was their only choice. But as they turned to flee, the figure moved with them, faster than they could have ever imagined. The girls bolted for the front door, but it was too late. The figure was right behind them. As Sarah reached for the handle, the door slammed shut in her face with a force that shook the house to its core. In that moment, they knew they were trapped. The last thing Lily heard before the figure reached them was Sarah's terrified scream, echoing through the house. What would you do if you saw a face staring at you from the other side of your window in the middle of the night? Would you run or try to confront it? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories. Story 5. The Phantom Caller. Emily had been looking forward to this sleepover for weeks. It was her best friend Mia's birthday, and Mia's parents had rented a beautiful cabin in the woods for the weekend. Surrounded by towering trees and distant hills, it was the perfect setting for a memorable getaway. The group of friends, Emily, Mia, Sarah, and Jenna, arrived at the cabin laughing and joking, ready to settle in and start their weekend of fun. The cabin was spacious and cozy, with a fireplace crackling in the living room. giving the whole place a warm and inviting atmosphere. The first night was everything they'd hoped for: games, snacks, and stories told around the fire. But as the night wore on, things started to take a strange turn. After hours of staying up late, everyone went to their respective rooms to sleep. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, though. The air in the cabin was thick with tension, and the way the wind howled outside seemed to make the house feel even more isolated. It was when Emily was lying in bed, just on the verge of falling asleep, that the phone rang. At first, she thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone had dialed the wrong number. But when she checked the caller ID, her blood ran cold. The number was unlisted, and the area code wasn't familiar. Curious but a little nervous, she answered the phone. "Hello?" The line was silent for a long moment, and Emily was about to hang up when she heard it. A soft whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Emily." She froze. The voice was faint, distant, but it was clear that it was calling her name. No one else was in the room with her. She glanced over at the door to make sure it was shut, then back at the phone. It had to be a prank, right? But something about it made her skin crawl. "Hello? Who's this?" Emily asked, her voice shaking. There was another pause, and then the whisper came again, louder this time. "Emily, it's me." But there was something wrong with the voice. It didn't sound like anyone she knew, and yet it seemed eerily familiar. She felt her heart beat faster in her chest. This wasn't funny anymore. Without saying anything else, she slammed the phone down, her breath shallow, her hands trembling. She lay back in bed, trying to convince herself it was nothing. Just a prank, that's all. But then the phone rang again. This time, Emily didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone quickly, hoping to put an end to whatever this was. "Hello?" Silence. Complete silence. Just as she was about to hang up, the voice returned. "I know you're alone." Emily's stomach twisted. Her heart was pounding in her ears. She could feel the tension mounting. Was someone in the cabin with her? Had they snuck in? "Who is this?" Emily demanded, her voice shaking. "What do you want?" But the voice didn't answer her question. Instead, it whispered again, each word hanging in the air like a shadow. "I know you. I see you." A cold sweat broke out on Emily's forehead as she tried to control her breathing. It was too much. She had to get out of there. She grabbed her phone and rushed out of her room, hoping to find someone else who could explain this. She knocked on Mia's door first, but there was no answer. It was past midnight, but she thought Mia would still be awake, maybe chatting with the others. Confused, Emily went to Sarah's room and knocked again. Still no answer. Now she was beginning to feel panicked. Was it possible that the others were playing a cruel prank on her? But why would they go to such lengths to frighten her in the middle of the night? The phone rang again. She answered it instantly, unable to let the unknown caller win. "What do you want from me?" A low, guttural laugh filled the line. "It's not what I want from you. It's what I've already taken." Emily's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The voice didn't answer. Instead, there was a long, drawn-out breath, so deep, so ominous, that Emily felt like the walls of the cabin were closing in on her. Something was terribly wrong. The air felt heavy, charged with an unspoken dread. Before she could react, the phone went silent, the line disconnected. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the phone in her hand, her entire body frozen, in fear. The wind howled outside, and suddenly, she was acutely aware of the silence that surrounded her. She could hear nothing, not the usual creaks of the house, not the murmur of her friends' voices. It was as though everything had stopped, in a state of panic. Emily rushed to Mia's room again. This time, she was greeted with a strange sight. Mia was sitting at the foot of her bed, staring blankly at the wall. "Mia, what's wrong?" Emily whispered, stepping inside. Mia didn't respond. Emily reached out to touch her shoulder, but the moment her hand made contact, Mia snapped out of her trance, jerking away from Emily as if she had been startled from a deep sleep. "Mia?" Emily repeated, her voice pleading. Mia blinked rapidly, her expression blank. "Did you hear that? Did you hear him?" "Who?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. "Who did you hear?" But Mia only shook her head. "I don't know, but I swear I saw him. I saw him standing outside the window and I heard his voice. It was calling me." Suddenly, Emily wasn't sure if she was dreaming or if this was a nightmare that she couldn't wake up from. She had to get out of there. Whatever was happening, whatever entity was haunting the cabin, it was real. The air was thick with dread, and the walls seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The friends gathered together in the living room trying to comfort each other, but it was clear that something was very wrong. They couldn't ignore the whispers in the air anymore, the feeling that they were being watched. The phone had stopped ringing, but the unease in the house had reached an unbearable point. "We need to leave," Emily said, her voice panicked. "We need to go right now." But Mia looked at her confused. "Leave? What do you mean? We've barely been here for a day." "No, we can't stay here," Emily said, her eyes wide with terror. "There's something in this house, something watching us. And it's not just the phone calls, it's everything. Don't you feel it?" The others were silent, but their faces said it all. They were all starting to feel the same way. Jenna, usually the skeptic of the group, was clutching her phone tightly, her eyes darting around the room. "I'm with Emily," Jenna said finally, her voice trembling. "There's something off about this place." But before they could react, the lights flickered. The entire cabin seemed to shudder as if the foundation was being shaken. And then, the phone rang once more. This time, Emily didn't pick it up. But when the voice finally came through, it was different. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was loud, clear, and filled with pure malice. "Run!" The line went dead. Without another word, the group of friends scrambled for the door. But as they rushed outside, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The phone rang one last time and they all froze, too terrified to move. From inside the cabin, a deep, guttural voice shouted, "You'll never escape me." The night air was thick with terror as the group bolted into the woods, desperate to escape whatever was haunting them. The phone stopped ringing, but the voice still lingered in the silence of the forest. Emily looked over her shoulder and saw a dark figure standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching them. Its eyes gleamed in the moonlight, a twisted grin forming on its lips. And then it was gone. As they reached the car, Emily realized with a start that Mia was missing. She had been right behind them, but now she was nowhere to be seen. Mia's voice echoed through the trees. "Emily!" The phone rang one last time in Emily's pocket. But when she picked it up, all she heard was silence. What would you do if you received a phone call in the middle of the night from someone, or something, that seemed to know everything about you? Would you answer, or would you hang up and run? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling true stories.